welcome back. I'm Tara Lynn, and if you are new to following, I have a channel here where I chat about different natural beekeeping methods, permaculture, and also nutrient-dense food, and I maintain a Substack, taralynntoday.substack.com, where I go into a lot more detail about all of those themes. And so one of my recent posts that should be going live around the time that this video is going live is about how much my actual expenses were in beekeeping as a hobbyist. So I have been a freelance writer professionally since 2009. That's when I established my sole proprietorship. And I also speak to writing groups and to small business groups about ways of structuring their finances and different tax benefits that you can take advantage of as a small business owner and a sole proprietor. So all of that stuff was already fairly foundational for me before I even started beekeeping, which was in 2017. And I decided to approach it as a hobby because it looked like it was going to be expensive, and it also is very unpredictable. And since then, I really haven't seen an opportunity to actually turn it into a business. Every year is very expensive. I do have some ideas on restructuring my beekeeping so that I'll be evolving it out of a hobby and into a business. But I wanted to show you just how dramatic the expenses are and how much I had earned last year in 2025, which produced a deficit, as it has every year that I have kept bees. And there are a few things that I have documented in my post that are really not necessary expenses. So you could argue, if I was not going to donate a portion of the sales to a nonprofit every year, I also decided I wanted to have the honey tested last year for the first time, and I did 3 different harvests, so that was 3 different lab expenses that came out to be close to $400. So like that expense doesn't necessarily need to exist unless I'm going to use that in marketing my honey, which I may do in the future. But just to show you, this is like a little stack of receipts. This does not include all the digital receipts from any supplies that I purchased from online vendors. Actually, one of these is a packing slip from an online vendor, but otherwise, any purchases from Amazon really isn't reflected in this physical pile. But in my post where I talk about all the expenses, everything is included in there. Just to give you an idea of some visits to bee supply stores, like I have receipts that are $344. I have one for $328, one for over $200, $512, $447. These are just going to local beekeeping suppliers. I'm fortunate to have one just 3 miles from my house, but in the peak of the season, they're most likely and typically sold out of what I need. So I have to drive 45 minutes to an hour to a supply store, and they're only open certain days. Most of them are not open on Sundays. So outside of the work week, I have a really limited window of when I can get supplies. So there's a lot of challenges in that. Overall, including my beekeeping memberships, I also register my apiaries so that I get notified of aerial sprays. I have a video about that, which I'll link to in the description. I also used ApiGuard to treat for varroa in my hives this past year. I also did an oxalic acid treatment once they were broodless in the late fall, and that I did not include in my list of expenses because my beekeeping mentor lets me borrow his equipment, and he doesn't charge me for the actual oxalic acid, so we kind of trade equipment back and forth. It also does not include purchase or rental of any extraction machinery. That's also something that I borrow from my mentor, so that expense isn't reflected in there. But all of those expenses plus the supplies, this is reflecting at my peak last summer. I had 16 hives and I started the season with 10, but I spent $3,939. Everything is detailed on my latest post, really breaking down from when I started with bees and all of the expenses coming from $15, $11, some tiny expenses, up to over $800 for jars, labels, printer ink, because I print my own labels, and nearly $2,000 in supplies as well. So lots of expenses and of course some honey sales, but I'll talk a little bit more about this. Not a beekeeper that processes wax. I also don't offer any pollination services. So my only sales are from honey. And then I started offering propolis for sale as well, which seems to be really popular, so I'm going to continue doing that. My honey sales just amounted to just over $3,700. So you can see there's more expense than there is income. But again, like my two larger expenses this past year were the, equipment was of course the highest expense, but the lab tests for $400, like those weren't really necessary. So, if I hadn't had that, it could potentially show a profit there. I also, I've chosen to donate 10% of the honey sales to a nonprofit every year. If I decided not to do that or to do a different amount, that could also help out in a bit to show a profit. But what's not reflected in all the receipts and the whole breakdown of the expenses, which are linked into my post in the description, what's not reflected there is all my time. So it's really hard to quantify the time, not only inspecting the hives, but driving to all of the supply stores. I mean, if we tally up all the different receipts with going to Lowe's, going repeatedly to different supply stores, trying to be proactive and order equipment like this time of the year, anticipating what I'll need. Having all of that plus the time for extraction, which now is a multi-day process for me multiple times because I'll extract from my current apiary where I am right now in Pittsburgh, and then I have another apiary over 250 miles away, so factoring in the drive time for that, harvesting there too. And the factor too with driving and with supplies is when I'm at my Western North Carolina apiary, sometimes it's hard to predict what I'll need or how quickly they're going to go through equipment, or if I caught a swarm and I didn't realize it until I get there that it's in the swarm trap. So the closest supply store for where I am out there is an hour and a half away. I used to have two supply stores, both an hour and a half away in different directions, but one of those unfortunately just closed near Asheville. So I have to drive to North Georgia when I'm out there, and it's an hour and a half. Also not open Sundays, so it's like really limited to like when I discover I need the equipment and if they're going to be open and I have the time to go there. All of that time adds up, and when you're looking at all those expenses, that's not really reflected there. But there are some things that I'm planning to shift this year where I'll be able to structure things in a way where I can have those tax benefits that a sole proprietor can have, where I can deduct mileage and get a sales tax exemption and different things like that. One of the things that I'm hoping to do this year, and it's a little bit delayed right now just because of my husband's business demands, but my husband offered to start making my beekeeping equipment. So this would allow me to purchase the materials for frames, purchase the materials for the hive bodies, and he has a metalworking shop, but he can work with wood as well. And so he offered to build those and construct them. So building unassembled equipment will be cheaper, and having his free labor to construct everything will also save as well. And so there's another opportunity where I can reduce some of the expenses. I will have an upcoming post about that. I also lost some money kind of not reflected in these receipts because of some supplies that I purchased that are kind of unusable. Not really kind of unusable, they are unusable. And I've also, both on two ends, one, going to the beekeeping supply stores at times when there's a high demand for supplies in the peak of the season, and by the time I get there it might be like things that the other beekeepers didn't want, like maybe a box that's kind of on an angle a little bit or not really completely level. And so I have a lot of equipment where my colonies have gaps in their hives and I have to seal with like duct tape, or I'm gonna have to remove those boxes and sand them down. So it's creating more work. And in those cases I can still use some of that equipment. But I tried purchasing my honey jars last winter to kind of in anticipation of a big harvest, which I did have a big harvest. And I felt good when the boxes arrived last winter, and I opened them just to take a peek and make sure they weren't broken and put them aside. And when it came time to harvest, the glasses were all super wavy, and some of them had like nicks in them and weird inclusions in the glass where it would be kind of embarrassing to bottle in. I ended up, it was too late to return them, so I pretty much had to just eat that cost and recycle. Just to give you a visual of like the quality problems that I was finding with the glasses. So it might be hard to see here, but there's like a wave through the glass here. And I kept this one because the imperfections, like there's some weird like scratches here in the glass, like this can be covered by the label once I print the labels out. So like this one I could potentially use. This one you might be able to see more, there's like a weird wave in it, so I'm keeping this just as a placeholder because I might use it for my own honey bottling, but I'm not going to give it out as like anything for someone to purchase. The other problem that no problem with that one. The other problem that I ran into with these bottles is like, you know, I felt good that, oh, they weren't broken, and I literally just opened up the box last winter and I'm like, this is great, there's no broken glass, so I'll keep these. So I didn't take the time to look at every single bottle, and I also didn't really look closely because like when they initially come, all the caps are like this, and so I didn't look at the bottles nor look at the caps, and so some of these caps were completely crushed in transit. So the bottle might have been good, but the cap was not usable, which means the entire bottle is not usable. So all of that had to be scrapped, and like any of the ones that were good, I've kept. So like like I said, if the bottles like I could cover with the label, I'll use them. If not, I'll have them for personal use. And I'm keeping these as a placeholder in case I get more shipments with broken caps or dented caps, and that way I can swap them out and not all of this will go to waste. In some cases there was a few jars where I was able to, I had like a recent purchase where I could return them, but the majority of the bottles, and it was like multiple cases worth of glasses, a big loss that way. But now that we're at the start of a new year and I've had time to really review everything and look back on not just this past year, but every year, I see a very consistent demand for honey. So I'm really taking that into account for going to the effort to restructure things in a way where I can set this up as a business and take it out of the hobby level to make it a little bit more worthwhile, because at this point it's mainly just offsetting the expense. It's really not going beyond that, and it is a lot of work. I'll be sharing more about that in the next few months, and I have part 1 of the breakdown of all these expenses linked in the description, and then I will have a follow-up probably in March, right when swarm season's kicking off, and I'll have a lot more organized by then so that I'll have some more valuable information that I could share. If you have any questions, please comment either here on the video or on the blog post, and I'm happy to answer them. And if you have similar stories of your big expenses, please let me know, and I will share more next time.